Eamonn Butler. Eamonn, now this sounds like some nice little work-shy scheme to get people who probably don't fancy coming back to work because they worked from home during the pandemic. It sounds like a scheme that is more suited to work for them, but not necessarily the public. What do you think? Is this the ideal place, South Cambridgeshire Council Office? Is this the ideal sort of place to test this kind of new working week?
Well, I'm a ratepayer in South Cambridgeshire, and quite frankly, I think the ratepayers here think it wouldn't make any difference whether people work 4 or 5 days a week. They're still useless. But as an economist, I think that this is an experiment too early. There's already an experiment going on in the UK covering about 3,000 workers in 70 companies. It's led by Oxbridge academics, not people not in the world of work, of course. And it's a 6-month pilot that's due to end in December. But so the evidence isn't in yet, and it's sort of remarkable that a big public sector body should be taking this step when the evidence isn't there. The experiment hasn't yet finished. I mean, and many of the companies that are in that experiment say they're not going to continue it because they're struggling to get people in. They're struggling with rotas. They're struggling to manage teams because people aren't in on the same days, and that it suits some employees, but it doesn't suit everybody.
It just seems a bit rich, really. Why would they think that would boost productivity, especially if you say that they are pretty useless? A lot of councils, they're using, obviously they're paid for by the taxpayers. A lot of people aren't happy with the system that their council is already initiating. It seems very odd that they are planning to do this. Does the working week really need changing, in your view?
No, the argument is, of course, that a shorter working week produces less absence, less burnout, people feel less tired. But in fact, the evidence, if you look, France, for example, had an experiment with shorter working hours. And what they found is that people actually work exactly the same hours, except they work more of those hours on overtime. And that's the problem. If you've only got people working 4 days, they do the same hours, but a lot of those hours are overtime, so it actually costs you more money. And although a lot of people have reported a boost to morale, Labour economists know that this is only a temporary thing, that when you initiate a change in the workplace and you involve the employees, they all think, oh, this is great, absolutely. And then a year later, they've got used to it and they're neither happier nor less happy than they were before. It doesn't really change anything. So I think that the signs that people point to are probably only temporary signs. Well,
I sort of take umbrage at the fact that they're going to be paid the same. OK, by all means, they can work fewer hours, but they're knocking off 7 hours off the 30 hours to make it a 30-hour week. That's a bit out of order, do you think? If they're going to cut their hours, they should cut their pay.
Yes, and of course, remember that some jobs do require a 7-day presence. You've been talking about social work, and social work is a case in point. And I think that other people, like local ratepayers who aren't on a 4-day week, are right to feel umbrage about this. But it would need a huge rise in productivity in order to maintain the same work output in a 4-day week than in a 5-day week. So I think there's all sorts of difficulties with this.
Well, I think they're going to come unstuck with it. And when they do, I think that you, as a council payer, ratepayer there in that council, should definitely have a word with them. Listen, I think it's ridiculous, but I don't know why anyone would think that you... if you were going to trial this, would you not perhaps suggest that you trial it on a privately owned company? Then that makes more sense, right?
Well, that's what I say. It's already being experimented with. But any rational person would say, well, let's have the experiment. A 6-month experiment is going on, 3,300 workers in 70 companies. Let's see how that pans out. And then at the end of that, we'll decide whether this is a good idea or not. Launching a huge local authority into it is just very silly. And there's arguments, there's been other experiments around the world. Sweden, for example, tried to reduce working hours and decided they couldn't go through with it because it was just simply too costly. So the labour market in the UK is already tight. So, why should you reduce working hours more? We want more people to work.
It's just as I suggested and suspected. They're having a jolly